And with me is a returning guest, Lewis Black, who's the Director, President, and CEO of Almonty Industries. Let's talk about tungsten, educate the audience, benefits of tungsten, what is it used for?
Tungsten is kind of tungsten diplomacy. No one really wanted to talk about it at government levels because there's very little of it, and it's in everything. They're in all of the sectors.
What KPIs do you want investors to look at to determine valuation, success, growth?
Successful commission, ramp up, progress on phase 2, expansion, financing the molybdenum mine. We're working with the Korean government on downstreaming the tungsten locally.
So let's talk about the actual outlook going forward for Almonty and for tungsten. The next, you mentioned 12 months to get things up and running, but let's go 3 years, 5 years, or even 10 years out.
I think it's well known that China's announced an export ban on tungsten.
And welcome everyone to another Smart Money Circle episode. I'm Adam Sarhan. With me is a returning guest. We have the great fortune to speak to Lewis Black, who's the Director, President, and CEO of Almonty Industries. And Lewis runs Tungsten, a mining company that mines a very important metal that we all use. So Lewis, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome back to the Smart Money Circle.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me back.
So Lewis, as a quick refresher to the guest, to the audience, can you please give us an overview about you and your company and all the fun stuff in between?
My name is Lewis Black. I'm overworked, underpaid. I am one of the unusual managers in the resource sector, where I actually put a lot of my own money into the company. So I think that's always given a certain amount of confidence to my shareholders. We are the prominent tungsten producer outside of China. We are about to open in about 2 to 3 months, or commission 2 to 3 months' time, the world's largest tungsten mine that's been supported by 3 different governments, both in Korea, Germany, and Austria. And we have certain unusual and unique features in our company, such as hard floors on our contracts. So we are essentially 85% of our output goes to the United States, but we are the leaders in this field.
So you went fast there. You said you have the largest tungsten mine, and then you said something about a floor. Can you please explain what that is?
Sorry. Well, I try and get everything in right at the beginning, all the kind of really good stuff before I get onto the bad stuff. So we have on our contracts hard floors, which means if China collapses the price, as they've done in lithium and rare earths currently, it won't affect us. I mean, we'll still make money, we'll still meet our obligations, and we will survive. And these hard floors are with AAA rated customers. And I've always maintained this is the future of all strategic miners. That, and someone said to me the other day, actually from a tier 1 publication, news organization, they said, well, you could argue that a strategic or critical metal can only really be defined by how the market responds to it. And as we're the only ones with a hard floor, could you actually say that the only critical metals are the ones that receive hard floors? Because that's the market saying these things are so important, we're willing to absorb the market price risk in order to ensure supply, which I hadn't really thought about that as I'd always done it for a totally selfish reason, which was, as a large shareholder, I want to make sure that if geopolitics get to such a level and we find ourselves in the same bucket as, say, rare earths or lithium or some of these other metals that China has decided to, create problems by protecting the market share, I wanted to survive. But in fact, smarter people than me have looked at this and said, well, what is a critical metal? Who's defining what a critical metal is? Because rare earths are not rare, as an example of one metal or one plethora of group of metals. So that's why I brought that up.
Nice. So thank you for clarifying. So hard floor means you're guaranteed a certain price no matter what happens externally in the market.
There's no cap on the upside. So if the market price drops to a level, we will receive that level. We won't go below it. And that level is calculated on what all our obligations are, and enough for a decent steak dinner once a week. So but it ensures survival. And that's really the key. The problem we've all got ourselves into in the last generation, the last 30 years, is that when China arrived into the market and offered very, price sensitive material driving everyone out of business. That was how they bought the market share. I think we have to say that if we'd had such mechanisms back then we would not have these supply chain dramas that we see right now. Raw material supply would still be in existence. How long would China keep subsidizing their own supply to keep prices at lower levels? And we've seen prices rise because they've essentially stopped the subsidies, but they've taken all the market share.
Right.
And so this is just one tool I always thought was an effective way of ensuring the world's largest tungsten mine survives what the future could bring.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So let's talk about tungsten. Please let us educate the audience a little about the benefits of tungsten. What is it used for? And anywhere else you want to go with respect to tungsten
Well,
itself.
I mean, tungsten is it was always a kind of tungsten diplomacy. No one really wanted to talk about it at government levels because there's very little of it. And it's very tightly controlled by North Korea, China, and Russia, which, of course, is probably not the best situation to find yourself in. And it's in everything. I mean, we look at the metals, whether lithium, whether cobalt, nickel, we look at what industries that they're dominant in, and they're a fairly healthy list. But then you look at tungsten, and they're in all of the sectors. So it's not just an industrial metal used in grinding, cutting, wear parts, drilling, and this is oil, gas, mining, normal, basically all tools. But then it crosses into construction of automotive, aerospace. Then it goes into defense, munitions, armor. Then it's into medical, MRI machines, your scalpels. Then we're into the technology side, semiconductors, batteries, tungsten copper wire for all electrical infrastructures that are now conducted, windmills, your screens, the vibrator in your phone, satellite guidance systems. It's in everything, but you only need a small amount of it. And you don't really want to make a lot of noise about it as a government when you don't have an alternate supply. So you can scream about rare earths because they're not very rare. And you can scream about graphite and you can scream about lithium because you can find it elsewhere, but tungsten, you can't. And in fact, it was a shock to everyone when the previous administration in the US, in President Biden, he put tariffs on a tungsten industry that does not exist in the US. It was kind of a weird, but it was the first time tungsten had gone front and center. And it was interesting, a couple of weeks ago, I was at one of my customers who's the biggest parts manufacturer of penetrators. So they make the inserts for the penetrators that Northrop and these guys, when you manufacture munitions, these are the working parts. These are the tungsten component that's actually what defines a penetrator. And they said, we found ourselves in a rather unusual and a sort of catch-22 situation. We supply Ukraine with 50 cal penetrators. And these penetrators depend on raw materials at the people that we're shooting at, because this raw material comes from North Korea, from China, and Russia. So he said, imagine the irony of this, that we in fact can only defend ourselves if the people we have to defend ourselves against provide the raw materials for that defense work. Mm-hmm. So it's really, I think the current administration is working feverishly in the background to come up with at least a fix for this. And this is one of the reasons why we're re-domiciling into the US. There's lots of things going on in the background. But the good news is this mine in Korea has the ability to provide, for instance, the US defense with all of the tungsten that they'll require. And if it was, we're going to expand it anyway to phase 2, which starts when we commission phase 1. And that'll take about 12 months because a lot of the work has already been done. But theoretically, it's possible to go to phase 3 and phase 4. And then you could basically say it could provide everything the US needs, full stop, all industries. Because the US only consumes about 9,500 tons a year of concentrate. And the world output is about 93,000 tons. So you can see very little of it is required, but without it, there's no end process.
Got it. No, that makes perfect sense. So thank you for that, by the way. So let's talk about the actual outlook going forward for Almonty and for tungsten the next, you said mentioned 12 months to get things up and running, but let's go 3 years, 5 years, or even 10 years out.
Well, I mean, I think it's well known that China's announced an export ban on tungsten, and they're now working through, like they have with antimony, the permitting of dual use. The problem is that it's so broad that they've done every tungsten product, and because of the uses of tungsten, it theoretically disqualifies anyone from getting supplied. Because if you make a braking component, there's no guarantee that that braking component won't end up in an armored vehicle, for instance, or on a military aircraft. That's just, that's the reality. So China has now baked in a system where they can decide who gets it and who doesn't, and they use our own paperwork against us because their defense straight away was to say, well, you already do this. Not exactly true. The US and the EU do have dual use rules, but it's very specific to particular products. Because if you capture all the products, you can exclude everybody. Because, as I said, a braking system can end up anyway. So China has been always very creative in being this almost victim in the scenario by saying, well, don't blame us. We're just working to the same standards that you do. But now they have real WTO, justification to limit exports if they so chose. No, there's no guarantee they're going to, but they have that mechanism. So with us, we will move straight to expansion because we could sell 3 times what we produce, even with expansion, because of the desire in our sector to diversify and at least have a balanced supply chain. Doesn't mean buying solely from us, but it means that you're balancing your procurement. 90% of all tungsten comes from China, Russia, and North Korea. So you kind of have limited choices right now.
And just to be clear, you're not working in those 3 jurisdictions, correct?
No, we only work in democracies because
Fair
I found
enough.
that transparency has value,
Right.
not just to my own mental state, but also to my customers. Yes, we are guests in other people's countries. Yes, we have to respect their own needs for tungsten. That's very much the case. But we also know that the president's son isn't going to decide one day he wants to be in the tungsten business, repaint the front gate, and we find ourselves needing a different key to get in. So, and our customers like the transparency of it. I mean, yes, we comply to accredited principles, the highest level of ESG, international standards of ESG. We have, we're audited every year by our customers. So we tick all those boxes. We have a high degree of automation and therefore of safety compliance. So, we work in sectors, our customers work in sectors that have a very high degree of sensitivity in some of them. You can't just roll up and say, good morning, I'd like to supply the US Defense Department with tungsten.
Correct.
It doesn't, it's just not something which you can decide on a Friday and happen on a Monday. There has to be levels of transparency because when you're in an industry like tungsten, which is so sensitive politically because it's so important, you have to be, an angel in that regard. You have to be completely, everything needs to be viewable. And I think we've done a good job in that. But I think you haven't also mentioned our moly, our molybdenum deposit, which of course now which is also used in defense. And we've made a deal with a company that supplies all the moly steel to SpaceX and to the defense sector. And they're building a brand new plant in Texas to be able to really service those customers correctly or more efficiently. And we have an advantage there as well. It's already permitted. That's the thing in democracies. Permits are not your friend because they take a great deal of time to get, if you can get them. And it's 8 to 10 years. And that's if it goes smoothly. Remember, we bought Korea. We bought this project in 2015. We're opening now, 10 years. And we've had, some resistance in some areas where it was problematic and it cost us some money and all the usual stuff. But it's been relatively, touch wood, smooth. And we had a government that was very supportive, a local community very supportive. We had all the things you need, and it took us 10 years. So, I think building in a democracy is not easy. Any mine that's fully permitted has great value because I can't see how it's going to be. I mean, in Canada, you can't build a mine. You can't get the permit because of the First Nations legislation. You can't sort of unravel that. Australia, it's getting much more difficult. South Korea is not a mining jurisdiction. We were fortunate the community wanted it. The EU hasn't opened a new mine in I don't know how long. US, it's a well-trodden, they know that it's very difficult to open a mine there. So I think the moly is an important part that we haven't really spoken about because we focused on the tungsten. But the fact that it's fully permitted, environmental and mining permits, we have now an offtake with a hard floor on it as well. And we'll look to start financing that during this year. And it's only 150 meters from our existing infrastructure. So it's very cheap to get in there, which is even more important. But I do feel that it's going to be very difficult for any democratic administration to accelerate mining in democratic jurisdictions. I think it's going to get more and more difficult. And so that brings me on to what the future holds for us. Well, we have two strategic metals under our belt with vast resources. I mean, 60, 70, 80, 90 years or more, both high grade in a safe jurisdiction that is not a mining jurisdiction, but it's a safe, mature democracy. Obviously, our Portuguese asset has been there for 136 years, so we have some inkling of how to mine tungsten and process it, which is normally the issue with most new tungsten mines. And I think it probably is fair to say that given the importance, especially of tungsten, molybdenum is less scarce, so it has less relevance in this conversation. It should really be part of a bigger story in terms of a strategic who needs this material. I mean, from January 1, 2027, you cannot supply the US military with any type of munitions or armor that contain Iranian, North Korean, Russian, or Chinese tungsten, which pretty much means us. And I'm still first and foremost a shareholder. And I think that's a very important distinction to remind people. I was the guy in the room that stood up and said, okay, I'll run this. But, my allegiance, my focus is on shareholder value. And that doesn't mean I'm going to have a Yahoo moment where I'm going to think that I'm, more valuable than I really am. But I think for the good and longevity of the business, it's important that it's probably attached to an organization or to a group or to a system that can provide a long-term solution of diversification.
So that's a really good point. When management's aligned with shareholder value, let's talk. Actually, it brings up my next question too, a good segue. What KPIs do you want, or key performance indicators, do you want investors to look at going forward to determine valuation, success, growth, so on and so forth?
Growth. I mean, obviously, successful commission, seeing a ramp up, seeing progress on phase 2, which is the expansion, see some progression on the financing development of the molybdenum mine, and seeing our program that we're working with the Korean government on downstreaming the tungsten locally. I'm going to look for internal growth rather than external. I choose that for two main reasons. One, because it's a much more efficient use of capital to internally grow than look to external. And external, you never know what you're really getting. I mean, you can do all the due diligence in the world, but ultimately, does anyone really sell something that is fabulous? You would do it if it's to a much larger organization, but to me, I'm a small company, so I'm not going to get the creme de la creme sometimes. I have to be creative. But it's the fact that I can generate so much growth internally between the tungsten mine and the molybdenum mine in Korea that are essentially joined. Those are my KPIs for investors to say, we can grow, we can attract all kinds of governmental support for these two strategic metals, and know that if my phone rings, and it may or may not have already, but let's just say it hasn't, if it rings and somebody's saying, maybe we should look at a bigger picture here, I'm not going to say, oh, no, this is my baby. I got to stay with this. I live for this. I get up in the morning and I don't sleep because I sweat this. I bleed this. That's not going to happen. If I feel this is going to be in better hands for the longevity of the business that we've created, I'm amenable. I saw before, I've done this before. I've developed a tungsten asset. I sold it for 21 times earnings. I gave some really clear indications of how to manage it because it was designed that, it was turnkey. The new owners decided that they brought in experts. It was an unmitigated disaster, and I bought it back for $1. And so so this time I'm going to be
great.
even, but that wasn't the same. It was the Portuguese project. It wasn't the same size as, of course, Korea. So that's why I have a high degree of automation in Korea. I'm making this as turnkey as I can, that no matter what expert comes in with his genius ideas, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Because I want to hand something on, maybe one day, of strength, not of weakness. And that's my KPI is to make sure that we maximize our value efficiently. Don't get stupid. Don't get greedy. This is not a lottery. It's just business. But to remember, it's very important. There is a big difference between balance sheet valuation and strategic metal valuation. We've already highlighted this in the sale of Portugal all those years ago, where we were paid 21 times earnings. This is, it wasn't because the buyer was an idiot. The buyer was very smart. It was about availability of supply, because you have to remember something very important. You use very little tungsten on the end process. On that basis, it doesn't really matter what that metal costs you, because without it, you don't have an end process.
There's nothing. Yeah. Right.
And that's, I think, a key takeaway of valuation. Supply is much, you don't want a mine that's just bleeding money, of course. You want something that holds its own, and which is great and is efficiently run and is properly put together and has transparency and has all of its safety requirements and its ESG, all these wonderful things are in place and operating, but the cost of the metal doesn't impact your use. Your availability of supply does. And that's why you can garnish much higher valuations per earnings than perhaps other more traditional metals like copper or nickel or even lithium. So that's something I think is often mistaken because, unbelievably, and this is a shocking statistic, we're the only ones who essentially, well, no, there were two companies. One was Dragon Capital. It was Tiburon. Back in the day, they owned the Mason near Foul tungsten asset, and they sold it to Dragon Capital. So they made some money, and then there was us. That's it. In the last 17 years, there have been two groups that have made money in tungsten. And the reason we've been able to do it from our side is because we've had that processing knowledge contained within our company. And I can't underestimate how important that is. So that is what I believe are my KPIs that I'm shooting for. And I very much hope that my shareholders hold me to account as a fellow shareholder that I get it done.
Yeah. So what you're saying basically is that make sure you understand the value of the actual end product, because the balance sheet, the valuation, the multiple, all that stuff is fungible, for lack of a better word. But really, the fact that you can sell the tungsten, have that, and have the demand that's just constant forever because of all the sensitivity around it is really what matters. And if you focus on that, you'll be able to grow the business and not get caught up in the day to day or get lost in minutia or the other details that could send you off the deep end. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to look at this almost in an abstract way because it has such prominence in so many different sectors. The most important thing is get it working, make sure it doesn't bleed money, get consistency of spec and of scheduling so that you know that every day, 7 days a week, come rain or shine, it's giving you exactly what you expect it to. It's consistent and reliable, and that your CFO isn't coming into your office, holding a bottle of Jack Daniels, going, "Oh my God, why are we in mining?" So it has to be turnkey. It has to be, for want of a better word, de-skilled. And once a mine is operating efficiently, there's no reason to have all these geniuses in there reinventing the wheel. Engineers can't help but try and change things. Oh, we could do this better. Why? It's already working great. Oh, we could do better. And I know that's part of the engineering psyche, but this is not what I'm trying to achieve. I need to make a project that behaves like our other ones. I mean, Portugal, we make money. Not much money because it's an expensive mine with a very low grade. But I say to everyone, if we can make money in an old 136-year-old project with a grade basically 20% of what we have in Korea, imagine what we're going to be able to do with an underground mine that's very similar in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And we get all kinds of, I get lots of the peer groups saying, oh, they've got all this debt and that. Well, we're a development company. We've just completed a project finance, round, which has all been drawn down. The mine is about to open. And we've chosen debt as a way to shield our shareholders from dilution. And the debt is friendly. It's not this kind of like debt to equity, crazy PE fund, hedge fund where, it's not fatal debt. And our mine still make money. The Los Santos mine was open, was making great money. Because people say, oh, you haven't made money. Well, because we're a development company. We've been building the world's largest tungsten mine, but our operations are still profitable. So, I know I'm in a space, junior space, where, everyone tries to take a bit of a tear, rip a tear off you. I've got some guys ringing up journalists screaming that they're biased or they're discriminating against their tungsten project. I mean, complete insanity. So sometimes it's quite difficult in this space, but stay as a shareholder focused. What's important? Track record, deliverables, and who's behind it. It's unlikely that 3 governments have supported us because we're morons. I mean, 1 government maybe, 2 possibly, but not 3. They're not all talking. They're not all sitting around and having dinner, eating lobster, going, what do you think of blank? What do you think about Monty? They're not doing that. They look in their own isolation. So we've been, highly scrutinized for many years by governments. And that's an important thing for shareholders to really grasp, is that we haven't gone to the traditional high yield PE funds. We went, big boy. We went to the big boy, big pants financing, which we shouldn't have been able to get unless we were very special.
So that's a really good point. I was going to ask you about the debt as well. So thank you for addressing that. And I love the fact that you're saying that your development phase now because you're building, and then once you build it, you'll be able to reap the rewards of all of that hard work and endless time and energy and effort and money and all that fun stuff. And then it'll more than recoup, hopefully, everything you've been through and then some. And that's where the payoff is on the other side of that. And
if
you're
you
right
look at the
there.
debt, most of the debt is friendly. It's with friends of the family. It's friendly lenders. It's not fatal debt. But when we took that debt, the share price was much lower. And so now the share price is appreciating. At some point, we're going to clean that balance sheet up through conversion. This is normal. We will go to the lenders and say, what do you think of this? Because most of them are already shareholders in the company. So this is not a big ask. But I think that the key with debt is that it's okay if A, you're actually moving to a finish line, and B, it can't destroy you and your shareholders.
Right. So
You know,
you're saying there's two kinds of debt. There's good debt and there's bad debt. The good debt helps you get towards the finish line. The bad debt cripples you, so to speak, and does not help
well,
you get
and
there.
you every once in a while you do end up with a lender who, quite frankly, acts out of their own self-interest to the detriment of all the others, and perhaps behaves in a way that, let me put this without getting sued, is detrimental to all shareholders and also to the regulators. Because, quite frankly, sometimes people feel that the rules don't apply to them. Your
Yeah.
job as management is to deal with this rather than just run around going, oh, woe is me. What am I going to do? Like, oh
Right.
dear. I mean, this is terrible. I should ring a recruitment agency and find a new gig before this all, you don't, it's what's it, my son's favorite movie, never give up, never surrender. If someone does nonsense that threatens the value to my shareholders and to me, I'm not going to take that kindly, and I will go fight. You know, so we didn't get this far because when we walked into KfW IPEX, who was the main lender, 80% of the project cost. They'd never done a tungsten project. They'd never done something so small. I don't think they've even spoken to someone as small as me. They were like, are you lost? There's a sandwich place next door. You're looking for, they were completely confused. What was I doing in there? This was initially they were like, well, Lewis, you're a lovely guy, but we build car factories for Toyota. I said, well, bear with me. 2.5 years of due diligence from their independent engineer Hatch, setting me almost impossible hurdles to meet. We met every single one of them. We didn't get here. We've been around the longest. We're the last man standing, and there's a reason. We fight
Yes.
because we know the value is here. And the fact that what's happening now geopolitically is supporting our story enormously is a great testament to what I always say, it's better to be lucky than smart. Because we are now peaking at a time where China just announced no more tungsten for you, which is about as good a place as I can be. And as the price starts to rise in track and antimony, hold on to your hat. That's all I can really say.
I love it. Well, Lewis, this is a great way to end it. I thank you kindly. This has been absolutely fantastic. Congrats on the success. Last time you were on, I think your stock has tripled since then, or definitely has doubled, if not tripled. And probably next time you come on, it'll double and triple again and again. So, congrats. So you're doing a great job, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon. This was fantastic.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you very much.